Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our very first episode of Real Talk with ISTA. Just as a friendly reminder, these are little chats that we have. We'll have a couple of experts and people from ISTA and around the state and country talking about some issues that we see in the classrooms as we're spending time in the classrooms. Jason, you want to give us just a little bit of background on yourself, just a quick snippet?
Sure. I'm ISTA President. That's why I'm here. And I teach full-time biology at both Lyons Township High School as well as St. Xavier University. I also work with pre-service teachers at the university I do lots of informal stuff, a lot of consultant work for entities like Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Chicago Zoological Society. My life is biology education all the time.
Very cool. And I'm Dr. Dina. I'm the Director of Assessment for ISTA. I'm also with the Illinois District in School Improvement at AIR, so I work in and around the state with teachers and superintendents and school districts on implementing science and math and trying to get science into schools for all kids. So for me, access and equity to high quality science education is a big issue, and that's why I'm here. And both of us are here today to kind of talk about an issue that is probably one of our biggest pet peeves, and we hear about it from you, our teachers, all of the time. And that is this issue of having to post our daily learning targets or learning objectives or whatever it is that your district happens to call them, having to post those on the board for the kids. Jason, what do you have to say about this?
Well, this is something, when I present all over the country, I hear this quite a bit. And I think we may have touched on this before in a previous episode, but Dina and I know each other because we both worked for the ISB NGSS curriculum writing team. And we had quite a bit, like a couple hundred hours of training under international NGSS, National Science Framework experts like Dr. Brian Reiser and Joe Krajcik. And this kept coming up, and what Dr. Reiser refers to it as giving away the punchline. Why are you telling the kids what they're going to learn? Let them discover it themselves. That leads to longer lasting learning. So when I travel and do workshops and presentations, I hear this from a lot of teachers. I need to put the objective on the board. We have to tell the kids up front about what they're learning before they learn it, and that sort of thing. And that's pretty slap counter to the whole idea of inquiry-based learning and three-dimensional learning as prescribed by NGSS.
Absolutely. I would completely agree with you on that. And so for me, I work a lot with superintendents, and a lot of what I try and do is bring science to schools that haven't necessarily been focused on science because they are more focused on math and ELA, and I think that's kind of par for the course for a lot of our schools. I actually have a blog post on that for a Dear Dr. Dina column on how to bring science to the forefront and how to integrate math, science, and ELA. So check that out if you're a member. And remember, you can get your membership for free through the end of the year. But I remember having a conversation with a district superintendent who told me that I could work with the science teachers on doing things like driving question boards and turning the classroom around so kids are trying to investigate a phenomena and explain a phenomena. And I could do the driving question board, but I also had to make sure that the teacher had the daily learning target listed on the board. And I could not get the superintendent to see that that's actually lowering expectations for the kids. And I mean, this is how I kind of sum it up over here on the slide. Today, the students will not have to do any critical thinking because I have to write the answer on the board.
Yes.
So that kind of sums up the issue, and I think a lot of our members can kind of agree that this is something that's going on that is kind of hard to talk about. So why do we think that this happens? What are your thoughts on this? Why do you think this is going on?
I think it happens for a few reasons. I think one is that it's easy for evaluators to see what the teacher's doing in a day, and administrators have a full plate. We know that. I think that it's so, and I hate to use a Harry Potter quote, but it's the choice between what is right and what is easy. What's right is maybe a question is posted that would lead students to want to answer it over, this is the punchline. This is what you're going to learn. The nature of science may not be the nature of an English class or something like that. And I think we have to stop treating all of these content areas as if they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
That's very dangerous, especially in science, which is based on discovery. So I think having a question posted is fine, but it definitely should not be giving away what students are, going to be learning for themselves. And if you have a true student-driven classroom and you want to see student growth, you need to not give everything away and let them discover something. This is why we do three-dimensional storylining. This is why we do storyline units. That's why that's a national initiative right now,
Mm-hmm.
is because we want students to look at a phenomenon and figure things out, not learn about, but figure things out. And that's the big difference between a traditional old school science classroom and the next gen classroom. We want kids figuring things out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what an administrator should be looking for when they're evaluating a teacher. What are kids figuring out that day? And they can't figure it out if you already told them what they're learning.
Exactly. I always kind of wonder. There seems to be this mismatch. I'm glad you brought up the point about evaluations. And like I said, I happen to work with a lot of administrators, and they do have a lot on their plate. But also, there aren't a lot of administrators that have a lot of experience with science outside of their K-12 experience. And let's face it, K-12 science education historically has not been NGSS aligned. It's not been
No,
three-dimensional. It's not been
not
aligned
at
to the
all.
K-12 framework because that's
That's
brand
right.
new. So our administrators have this weird balance of not seeing what this new science looks like, but I have to evaluate it and I don't know what that looks like, and I have to use this Danielson framework here in Illinois. Seems to be the most popular framework for instructional teaching learning, and there's not a lot of good examples of how else can you show that you as a teacher are planning your objectives and showing coherence, and how do the kids show that they understand what's going on and the importance of going on if you're not writing it up on the board.
Right.
I think that has a lot to do with it. But the thing is, so I'm going to go on to the research says, so I'm going through the process here in Illinois to become a qualified evaluator. I'm going through the training. I'm watching all the modules. I'm doing all the assessments and everything. And what's really interesting to me is nowhere in Charlotte Danielson's framework does it actually say teachers have to write on the board, today the student will, or make sure you have I can statements, or today's learning objective is. It doesn't say that anywhere. And actually, if you go through the training, there's a module about teachers setting objectives that says you're not going to see this in the lesson, in a good lesson. You have to talk to the teacher about it. And now we talked a little bit about driving question boards, and that's one way to do it. And that's one of the most exciting ways to me, because I'll talk to kids as, the evaluator. One of the most exciting things for me is to go into a classroom where they're doing driving question boards. And what that is, if you're not familiar with it, you can check out a blog post by Amy Park that'll be coming soon, one of our ISTA folks, about driving question boards. But the kids come up with questions to try and investigate and solve and explain a phenomenon. And what's really, great for me is when I talk to the kids and I say, hey, what is it that you're doing today? They can tell you a conversation, even though it's just a question on the board. Oh, we're trying to answer that question by doing this and looking at this and solving this because we want to explain that. That is a lot higher order thinking. That is a lot higher expectations for all of your kiddos. That is a lot more rigorous thinking, and that's a lot more cognitive lift for the kids to do than just pointing to the board and saying, today I'm going to learn about condensation because that's what the teacher wrote on the board, and it's got that science vocabulary in it, which I think is another issue that you and I are going to talk about at some point, is that science vocabulary in NGSS. I see it all the time, and I think it comes down to you need to make sure that the kids know what's going on. You have to make that explicit. That's where that buy-in and things come in. But writing the answer on the board and telling the kids to point to it is the lowest level of cognition that there is, and you're setting very low expectations.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing that we constantly hear, and I just presented to like 150 teachers in Texas last year, and this became a very big discussion with us there. and I hear it all over Illinois, is this idea that just give the kids the answers. You're only doing a good job if you're giving kids the answers. I'm not in the business of giving kids the answers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the business of leading them through a learning um, storyline, phenomenal sequence, something. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm in the business of leading their learning, not giving them the answers, not spoon feeding them. I don't lecture. That is the safety net, right? The lecture is the safety net to say, well, they have the information, I'm done. But if you want to see student growth, they have to. I mean, what does the research say about where we want students? We want students to be self-directed learners.
Mm-hmm.
Look into the research on self-directed learning. It's really perfect for the science classroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's all about discovery and getting them to be thinkers. And I see this at the university all the time, and all of my university colleagues say the exact same thing. We have kids coming to us who can't think. They can't problem solve. They're so used to being told, this is what's on the test, study for this, and then spit it back on the test. They're not thinkers. They can't problem solve. And we wonder why we have a science illiterate society.
Yeah.
And the coherence piece you brought up is really important. And I just wanted to speak to that quickly because coherence is everything. The
Yeah.
student's ability to connect and integrate ideas that traditionally in the classroom were broken into separate units. That's not how the real world works. In the real world, you have a problem and you pull from the tool belt what the knowledge that you have and the science practices that you use to best fit solving that problem. That's what problem solving is.
Mm-hmm.
And we ignore it. We teach a DNA unit, we give a test. We teach a genetics unit, we give a test. We teach an evolution, we give a test. Where in the melanin storyline that we put out through the IST working group and we piloted earlier this year, they're integrating all of those ideas where they fit around a phenomenon. And it's much more engaging to the kids. But the coherence, and we've had teachers say, well, I really feel like if I'm doing this type of Punnett square in class, I should do all the other ones too. And the teachers that have done that go, I shouldn't have done that. It derailed the coherence. We got so hung up on this one thing that now when we come back to this, the kids just aren't into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They can't make the connections. And so coherence is everything. And I'm so glad you brought up that word because when you post a single daily objective and you're only assessing that one objective, that's not how this works. How it works is you're weaving ideas together to make connections. That's why there's cross-cutting concepts in NGSS. And I think a lot of people are conveniently pushing those to the side.
Yeah.
But if you want to find patterns and you want to find cause and effect in a variety of things, you have to be weaving these together in a single lesson.
Mm-hmm.
But we also can't look at NGSS as lesson level. We have to look at it as unit level, and that's where the coherence piece comes in.
Mm-hmm.
So posting those objectives singles things out, but that's not what we want. We want integrated ideas, and that's how science works in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can I do? And this is for teachers, parents, and administrators. And I'm going to post a question to you, Jason, that I know we've gotten into this conversation a little bit before. So for me, one of the pushbacks that I get from an administrator after I've worked with some teachers on doing a more student-centered learning project is that when I walk into the room as an evaluator, the teacher's not doing anything. So how do I know that they actually are instructing? How do I evaluate that? Because they're not answering the questions, they're not, pointing to the board. How do I do that? And I think you can probably speak very easily to it's not that the teacher's not doing anything. Explain to us a little bit about what's going on.
Well, the work comes in planning. And running the ISTA's NGSS biology storyline working group has been illuminating for many people. For us, we know how long and how much collaboration is required when you're writing a good coherent storyline unit, right? An NGSS driven unit.
Hmm.
It is a lot of collaboration. So the planning piece is big. Now, I'm working with several districts right now. And, as you know, ISTA, we have a biology working group to more or less pilot this process.
Hmm.
And this working group has up to, I think, 30 some districts now involved in some
Wow.
way. And we open it, it's public. And, I send out invitations to whoever wants to attend, including all my teachers that I work with at my school, for example. And we we put it out there, and then people come and they're like, this is the best PD ever because I get to sit and talk with other teachers about how this works.
Hmm.
But it's time consuming. It's very time consuming. It took us about a year of meetings, once or twice a month, to get together, to put the melanin unit together, which is a 3 to 5 week unit. But the meaningful collaboration that comes from that, it's everything, and it's required. That's why teachers who are the only science teacher in their district have such a struggle with this, and that's why we set these up so that they have other colleagues to work with. So the planning is where all of this work comes in. And I firmly believe that no evaluation should come without a pre and post discussion
Hmm.
about what are you doing in your classroom, and how all the planning that comes with that. Because the
Yes.
planning, when it comes to NGSS, the planning is everything. Execution is student driven. It should be student driven. It should not be teacher driven. And teacher as facilitator, as you know, is what makes an excellent teacher, according to Charlotte Danielson. That is
Hmm.
in the rubric.
Yeah, it is.
So we want this to be a student-driven process in the classroom. So students and parents and administrators who are used to the teacher as the spoon feeder, as the deliverer of information, as the know-it-alls in the classroom, right? Will walk in and go, oh, the teacher's not doing anything. They just sit there all the time,
Hmm.
where really you're the resource. You're talking to the students as they need you, and you're answering questions with questions, hopefully,
Hmm.
to get them led through this information. Now, a lot of the materials that I wrote, like the stuff on the Zoo Genetics Plus website, xy-zoo.com,
Hmm.
free for everybody, but a lot of those are controlled release of data. So here's a data set. Tell me what you think this means. And they figure things out. And then they start asking me, like, well, I can't answer this big question without this. Well, I just happen to have that data right here. And it's all real world data. It's authentic data.
Hmm.
And the kids are all going through it themselves. And by the time they're done, every kid knows why they did what they did, because they drove the process. So if you are an administrator who's evaluating, you need to be looking specifically for figuring things out
Hmm.
and not just learning about. That is the fundamental shift in science education today. And we all know,
Hmm.
according to research, that that's what kids need.
Absolutely. And I'll put up a link here to a couple of great websites to help administrators specifically look for those figuring things out
Mm-hmm.
practices. And I will also mention, because again, I've been going through the evaluation training. You're absolutely right. You have to have a pre and post observation discussion. And if you're going through that training, at least in Illinois, the official training, there is a module that's specific to setting objectives. And it says you have to talk to the teacher about this
Mm-hmm.
because it's done in different ways. Um, in that specific module, I think it's really interesting because Danielson herself is talking about a science inquiry based lesson that she does, in which her evaluator came in and saw that the kids were doing stuff, and they were, it was using clay to make boats and hold as many paper clips and float, right? We've all done some
Mm-hmm.
variation of that lab at some point. But the evaluator pulled her aside and said, well, I'll come back when you're actually teaching. And that's one of the reasons that
Yeah,
drove her to
that's
create this framework. So
yeah.
stop and ask yourself, if you're an administrator, if you're not having conversations with your teachers who have been going through this training process for NGSS and are trying to make their classrooms more three-dimensional, and not just science teachers, anybody, your math teachers that are trying to do a problem-based, student-centered lesson, have a conversation with the teacher to find out what the specific goal is. Because if the goal is to have the kids figuring stuff out and the teacher has to write the answer on the board and the kids point to it, they're not figuring stuff out.
Right.
And we're actually causing them to not progress in learning for students or in professional practice for teachers.
And that's a major failure in math, where we're still doing the lesson a day, sequence, and we're just expecting kids to keep up. Math of all subjects should be phenomenon driven. Show them, how does this fit in the real world, so they know what the kids leave high school with no math sense. It's just, it's really scary. But phenomenon driven learning in math is really powerful.
Absolutely.
And that shift definitely needs to come in. But to answer to the you had said about evaluation in the pre and post, we hear that a lot, where teachers are doing what they should be doing in this way, and they're getting dinged on evaluations for things that don't matter. And if they had that pre-conference, exactly, if they had that pre-conference, that pre-discussion, that administrator would know what to look for in this student-driven classroom. It's,
exactly.
We see it a lot. We see it a lot in classrooms all over the country, and I think that pre-discussion is everything. Because you have to speak to the planning. You absolutely have to speak to the planning.
Absolutely. So I am working with a couple of ISTA folks to specifically address what does it look like from an evaluator's point of view to evaluate science using the Danielson framework. Those will be coming out for our members. We're hoping to have them posted by fall. We'll be starting with Domain 1, which is where specifically we talk about this idea of planning objectives. And we do also want to say there's not just one way to do it. There are many types of instruction that meet three-dimensional learning in NGSS, and there are many different ways that we can make learning visible and set our objectives as teachers. So we're going to kind of cover that in the Charlotte Danielson for Science modules. Parents, I know you've talked a little bit too about your parents. So one of the concerns that I hear a lot from parents is, my child is coming home and the teacher didn't give the answer. What are they doing all day? Can you speak a little bit about, as a teacher, how do you front that, or how do you address that head on before it becomes a problem? Or as a parent, what can you expect and what can you do to help your child in this new kind of learning?
I think what I've done in the past is, I communicate with my parents via our email platform, our messaging platform through my school district. I pretty regularly. I send an email home twice a unit, at least. So they're getting an email every week, every 10 days or so. I will post an interesting link that connects to what we're doing. So, if we're doing genetics, I'll post something about Secretariat, the racehorse, and how he had a genetic mutation, and that's what allowed him to run, longer and faster, that sort of thing. Just something that's interesting that people can connect. And but I communicate early on with my parents about, your students will come home frustrated at times. They will come home saying that I didn't answer their question. I'm very explicit. At open house, I tell them all this. Now, with that information, I can say over the course of this year, I didn't get any parent complaints while the school year was in session. And I got parents who contacted me saying they had an amazing time in your classroom. I wish more people did this. Now, I didn't hear all of those myself. I heard those from my supervisor as well. And when I went on sabbatical for the last quarter of the year, I got some very nice comments from parents asking, are you going to continue to do these things even though you're not here? That sort of thing. So it was refreshing to hear that they understood what we were doing, and that this is not me. This is a national move to improve science education. I think if we're explicit up front about that, and you have administrator support to properly implement NGSS, properly, not there's four big areas, so let's separate the four big areas into four quarters and then teach as we normally did. Or you keep 80% of everything that we've ever done and just reorganize it. This is not how you implement NGSS. So you need that administrative support to really understand how to implement first. And that's really to transform your classroom into student-driven activity and move to the three-dimensional type teaching, which involves three-dimensional assessment, not just looking at content, but also how students are using the practices and choosing to use the practices in the appropriate way, and identifying the cross-cutting concepts. Like if you're looking at DNA sequences, sorry for all the biology examples, but if you're looking at DNA sequences, the whole reason we look at DNA sequences to answer questions is to look for patterns, right? That's how we use DNA. Does the sugar phosphate backbone of the double helix matter to a 14-year-old? No. Does using DNA to answer scientific questions matter? Yes. That's it. So it's changing your thinking to that fundamental shift that we all hear about, and getting kids to figure these things out using the tools that we're giving them.
And the last thing that I would say along the lines of administrator support is this is a big change for a lot of us. It's a complete change in instruction. It's a complete change in classroom. It's giving over control of the classroom, which is hard to do. And we didn't even get to talk about our poor elementary teachers that are trying to find a way to fit science in with all this other stuff coming up.
But we are working on that. ISTA is working on that. We're going to give those teachers the support they need.
Absolutely. So I know this was a lot of great talk. We had a lot of great ideas. We want you to contact us. I put both Jason's email up there and my email up there, jason@drcrean.com and ilscienceassessment@gmail.com, as well as our ISTA website, ilscience.org. Remember, you can get a free membership now through the end of December 2017 for a year of membership at ISTA. And we will be coming out with more webinars for our members that cover things like, so how do I actually do this? What are some resources that I can use? Anything else that you want to say on the matter, Jason?
And you can also sign up for our annual conference, which will be our 50th anniversary conference at ilscience.org as well. That is the place. That is the place to get to hear from these experts. These experts that we're mentioning, those in the research, will be there providing these very pointed workshops for teachers. So you definitely don't want to miss this. So you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck at this conference this year, and it's going to be held at NIU's campus in DeKalb. So it's if you're in Northern Illinois, it's an easy drive for everybody up here. So please make a point of signing up for that October 27th and 28th.
And for those of you that are joining us from below Springfield line, I know DeKalb's a little bit far to get to, and I use a little bit far to get to. We also have a partnership in Carbondale with Science in the South, where we also cover more of this NGSS talks, where you have more experts, and ISTA has a very big part in that as well. So feel free anywhere throughout the state, please send us your comments, concerns, questions, criticisms. Let us know what you want us to tackle here and what you need resources and help on, and we'll have our people work on that.
Yes, we'd love to hear, what are you struggling with and how can we help? How can we give you those tools that will make you successful in your own district?
Absolutely. All right. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next time with Real Talk with ISTA.